Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. We're diving into a topic today that a lot of you have been asking about, and that's leadership. And we're not just talking about, the old school definitions here, but what it really means to be a leader in today's world. To guide us, we're using an article from McKinsey called What is Leadership? A Definition and a Way Forward. It was published just recently, actually September 10th, I think it was. And I've got our expert here with us, of course, to help us unpack it all. Now, one of the things that we hear a lot, right, is that leadership isn't about titles, it's about action. But this McKinsey article, it kind of takes that idea even further, wouldn't you say? Like, they're really saying anyone can be a leader if they cultivate those skills. It really challenges that whole idea of the born leader. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely, it really pushes you to think differently about it, I think. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was how the article emphasized going beyond just like talking about leadership. It's more about what you do. Like how do you inspire that trust, that commitment through your actions? It's about aligning your words with your behavior, and that ultimately, builds your credibility and influence.
Right. It's walking the walk, not talking the talk. Makes you think about all those older ideas about leadership being some kind of innate trait. This article kind of throws those out the window. I thought it was refreshing how they talked about self-awareness and authenticity as the foundation for developing those leadership skills.
Yeah, definitely. Understanding your strengths, your weaknesses, your values, your beliefs,
Yeah.
right? And then using that understanding to actually be authentic as a leader. It's not about trying to be somebody you're not. It's about really understanding who you are and how that translates into how you lead other people.
Right, because everyone else is taking. Right, you got to be yourself. But it's interesting, though, because it's not just enough to be yourself. They go on to talk about these four specific behaviors that effective leaders exhibit. And they talk about being supportive, being results-oriented, seeking out diverse perspectives, and being strong problem solvers, which on the surface, I mean, those sound like pretty standard leadership qualities. But I'm curious, did anything about how they dug into these behaviors in the article stand out to you?
What I found interesting is, well, you know how they really emphasize that context is key. So, what works in one situation might not work in another. It's about being able to read the room, understand those nuances, and adapt your approach as needed.
So you're saying that adaptability is really what makes those four behaviors effective. And that makes me think about something else that they talk about in the article, which is this shift from that old command and control style of leadership to something they call service leadership, which feels like a pretty big change, right? Like, what are your initial thoughts on that?
It is, isn't it? It's a pretty big change from what we're used to. And what they argue in the article is that that old way of doing things, that command and control, it's just not that effective anymore. Especially, now with everything being so complex, things changing so fast. I mean, think about it. It used to be that leaders had all the information right,
Right.
and they made decisions kind of in a vacuum.
Right. It was all about hierarchy.
Exactly. But the article, it points out that nowadays, knowledge is everywhere, right? And things are constantly in flux. So that top-down approach, it just doesn't really work. And in fact, they even say that it can stifle innovation because it can create this culture where people are afraid to speak up.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you're afraid to share your ideas, then you're missing out on all those other perspectives.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of service leadership comes in. It's about shifting the focus from me to we, from telling everyone what to do to empowering them to figure things out for themselves.
So instead of being at the top, leaders need to be more like a part of the team working with everyone else. But what does that actually look like? How do you put that into practice?
Well, the article actually gives a really good example. They talk about Moderna during COVID. Their CEO, Stefan Bancel, he really embraced this whole service leadership thing. He made sure that everyone was in the loop, that they felt heard.
Interesting. So instead of just, hiding away, he actually opened up communication even more.
Exactly. And here's a really interesting part. They actually decentralized decision-making. So teams were able to make decisions on their own and adapt quickly to, how things were changing so rapidly.
Wow, he must have really trusted his team.
Yeah,
And I mean, it clearly worked, right? They developed a vaccine so quickly.
exactly. It's a great example of how empowering people can lead to some really amazing results. But it also highlights something else that's super important, and that's communication. Yeah, the article talks about that too.
Oh, for sure. You can have the best intentions in the world, but if you can't communicate effectively, nothing's going to get done.
Exactly. And it's not just about being clear. It's about really listening, trying to understand different points of view, and creating an environment where people feel comfortable speaking up, sharing their ideas and concerns.
So it's more like a dialogue, not just a lecture.
Precisely. They even give you some specific communication tools to use, which I thought was really helpful.
Yeah, I remember that they were talking about defining long-term goals, really listening to understand and not just to respond, and creating those open forums for dialogue. What was it about those tools that you found so useful?
Well, I think what really struck me was just how practical they are. You can use them whether you're leading a team or just trying to have a, productive conversation with your family. It's about those fundamental principles of communication.
Yeah, it's amazing how this article brings together all these different elements of leadership, right? Like we were saying, it's not about charisma or titles, it's about self-awareness, being adaptable, empowering others. And ultimately, it all comes down to communication. It really gives you a sense of what it takes to be a leader in today's world.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And it reminds you that it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process. You know, you're always learning, always growing, always adapting.
Absolutely. The only constant is change, right? And one of the biggest things I'm taking away from this conversation is just how much our idea of what a leader is has changed. It's not about being at the top anymore, it's about service.
Yeah, exactly. It's about helping others to be their best selves, to reach their full potential.
And that brings us to a really important question for everyone listening. How can you start to embrace this more service-oriented approach to leadership?
I think that's what it all boiled down to, right? When you think about your own leadership style, ask yourself, how can you better serve the people around you? What can you do, starting today, to empower them, to make them feel valued, heard, so they can do their best work?
That's such a great point to end on. A huge thank you to you. This has been a really insightful look at this whole idea of leadership. And for everyone listening, thank you for joining us for another deep dive. We'll be back soon with another episode exploring leadership in the age of AI. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep leading.